Thanks everyone for joining today. So hopefully you have time for your lunch already. And I would like to start this with a question. Have you ever wondered why the Chinese apps and the Western app look so different? So in this talk, I would like to take you on a tour across some of the most popular Chinese and Western apps, look at the commonalities and the comparisons, and then dive a bit deeper to see what are the possible reasons behind the difference. And for those who are watching outside of Palo, just a bit of self-introduction. So my name is Weiwei. I'm a UX designer, and I've been in the digital industry for close to 10 years now. And I've worn multiple hats before, so that kind of gives me a unique perspective on digital products. My company is Palo IT, so we are innovation-focused digital agency. And first things first. Okay, so after the session, you'll be able to have a few handy examples on how culture has influenced our app design. You'll probably see a few very unique interaction patterns that you've never seen before. And also you'll be able to share with your friends and colleagues if they are interested in learning more about the Chinese digital landscape. And I will talk through on three main parts. So I'll start with the case study on some of the most popular Chinese and Western apps, followed by hypotheses on why such differences, and then I'll wrap it up with a few key takeaways. Before I dive into details, right, I just want to do a quick poll over here. So how many of you guys have actually wondered about this question as well? If you have thought about this question before, press 1. If you did not think about it before, press 2. And if you press 0, I'm afraid the customer representative will take forever to get to you lah. Okay, I can see some response here. And by the way, if you have come up with some hypothesis of your own, like you have put forth some guesses, you can also type it here. Okay, so it seems that most of people are quite interested in this topic as well. You have thought about it before. Yeah, so for me, it's because I was someone who grew up in China and then I studied overseas. Whenever I look at the interfaces, I was also very intrigued. I would always be wondering why they look so different. And I want to be able to put my finger on it because I know there's got to be some ingredient that contribute to the different flavors in the app design. So this sharing was really fueled by my personal curiosity. And by no means any part of the presentation is to say that there's one approach better than the other, or there's only just one way to design an e-commerce app, for instance. So I think when you go through the sharing session, you would also realize that actually there are more than one way to design for a specific purpose, and there are likely valid reasons for that. So whether you are a developer or a designer or a product manager or like an agile coach, hopefully you'll be able to take away something that's relevant to your line of work. So let's see what apps we're talking about, right? I have basically looked at the most popular apps in our daily usage, and I have done the research based on a few sources. So I kind of bucketed the main app into these 6 categories. You have chat and social messaging, you have search, video streaming, news, internet banking, and e-commerce. So these are not in any particular order, but I guess this kind of sum up the main activities we'll perform on our app. So the first one is chat and social messaging. For this one, I have picked WeChat and WhatsApp because I suppose this is the dominant app, right, in the chat scene, and you probably check it out like every 5 minutes. So when you look at these apps, the first impression is that the listing page itself is quite similar in terms of the UI, the layout, because after all, it's just chat, right? So you would have the icon and then the person you're talking to and some preview text. That's about it. But when you start to go deeper into the profile, into the settings page, that's where you start to realize the app design start to diverge a little bit. So for instance, the profile page for WeChat actually has a lot more depth compared to WhatsApp. WhatsApp has the settings for one page, and for WeChat, you have setting as just one item on this page. When you look at, say, the payment over here, if you click in, you realize there are options for you to pay your bills and even your traffic fines. So it covers a range of services within. Another feature within WeChat that really showcases it as a super app is the WeChat mini program. So again, I'll do a quick poll. How many of you know what mini programs do? If you know, type 1. If you have not heard of it or you're not so sure how it works, you can type 2. So I just get a rough gauge. Okay, so this round I see a lot more 2s compared to last round. Interesting. Okay, so I will be able to share with you a bit more about the mini program. So in the simplest terms, the mini programs are web apps within the WeChat app. We know that apps generally fall into 2 categories. You have HTML5 apps, right, like web apps. So it's built on HTML5 and it runs universally across the platform, whether it's an iPhone or an Android phone. On the other hand, you have the native apps. So that's built on a language that's relevant to the platform itself. So for instance, you will use Object-C for iOS apps. Of course, we also have hybrid apps, but that's not really relevant to our today's topic. So mini programs, they are basically web apps, and WeChat has used this to achieve a number of purposes, right? So first is that the mini program, they are more efficient to build. So it cuts down the development time and it improves the efficiency. According to WeChat, a front-end functionality that may require 3 months to build in the past, now if you build it purely in HTML5, you'll be able to accomplish it in 3 to 5 days. So it's massive saving in terms of cost and time. And secondly, you'll be able to have a much more integrated user experience. So let's say you're chatting with your friend in WeChat about an upcoming movie. Then you will be able to just tap a mini program and then you'll be able to book the movie tickets straight away and finish the payment and then come back to carry on your topic. So it creates a seamless user experience. You could also order food takeouts and call for a shared ride, doing all of this without ever leaving WeChat. So this eventually ties back to the ultimate purpose, is that WeChat can use the mini program to create an ecosystem of its own. So imagine when you're able to plug in so many third-party services, you'll be able to shop, you'll be able to book tickets, even book travel deals, a lot of these things within WeChat. You do not think about leaving the app ever, and it increased the user engagement level, and this eventually translates into the business growth and revenue. So I'm going to show you an example of a mini program. You'll see where it's hosted within WeChat. When you pull down and release, you'll be able to see a list of mini programs. So this is an e-commerce mini program. As you will notice, right, the look and feel of it is very much similar to an app. Actually, that's one of the benefit of mini program, because it's web apps. The experience of it is very comparable to, say, if you build it in a native app, and the users get an enhanced experience because of this. So when you look at the statistics on mini program, now we already have 1 million WeChat mini programs. To put this into perspective, we have about 2.2 million apps in the Apple App Store. So that just shows how massive the third-party apps we have within WeChat. And it has really formed its own ecosystem. Another thing about mini programs is that you don't need to download and install it on your app because it's web-based. You'll be able to use it almost like a link, and you tap on it, you finish whatever transaction, and you stay within WeChat and move on. So this really gives WeChat the edge as a super app as it continues to grow. So when you look at WhatsApp from this perspective, it's really more focused on just providing the social messaging experience and just doing that one thing well. That's very different from WeChat's approach. So next up, we have search. I think you're probably all very familiar with Baidu and Google, so I wouldn't go too deep into this, but just one glance at the design of the app main page, you can see the difference. Moving on to video streaming, something we all very enthusiastic about. So I have picked Youku and YouTube over here because both of them are the top video streaming sites, and they have a lot of user-generated content. In general, I think Youku tend to have a bit more like vibrant layout. YouTube primarily has like maybe it's easier to just show you the interaction. So when you look at Youku, you can see that it uses like 2-column layout, 3-column layout, and even 4-column. For YouTube, I mean, it also uses some variation in the layout, but primarily it uses 1-column layout and infinite scrolling for content exploration. But what I really want to show you is some very interesting interaction pattern. The first one is to pull down and release. You actually seen this pattern in the WeChat example as well. So you'll be able to pull down and then additional function emerge. So Youku call this the second floor of Youku, and it mainly presents curated channels from Youku. It's a bit reminiscent of the TV watching days. So imagine if you have a lot of time to kill in the afternoon. Okay, I think I will get to the question a bit later. So when you're able to sit here and like imagine when you don't have much things to do and you just sit in front of the TV and watch all the programs that's streaming there the whole day. This is a bit like that. And for the pull down and release, right, it's mainly for the secondary function. So let's say if you do not ever discover this pattern, it doesn't prevent you from enjoying the core experience of searching for a video and watching it. So it's really more of a pleasant surprise if you find it. But yeah, they don't put the primary function under this pattern. So for the second interaction pattern, it's the rotating search keywords. I think you'll be able to focus on the search box over here, and I will show the interaction. So you'll notice that the search keywords will be rotating automatically. This is to recommend the trending items to users, and I have yet to see it in any of the Western apps. Most of the time, they will have the search icon. When you click on it, it expands and you'll be able to key in your search keywords. Even if when they have some text over there, it's usually the default help, as in the help text. So for this pattern, I find it quite interesting because it keeps the user informed on the hot topics without being overly intrusive. And also sometimes it can serve as a form of advertisement. And for the third interaction pattern, it's called Damukun. So it literally means bullet screen. And that's because all the comments are flying across the screen like bullets. So I would put it into the same category as like Facebook live streaming experience. But it also has some major differences here because for Facebook live streaming, the comments layout is different. It's at the side. And on the other hand, right, it's usually just for a live experience. But for this particular pattern, you can see it on any video that's like even uploaded 3 years ago. So let's say you are watching a movie and then you suddenly see a comment that resonated so much with you and you'll be like, yes, I also feel that way. The comment could be from someone 3 years ago, but still it creates an experience of watching it alone yet together. So we have some common responses towards Damokun, including like engaging and it's fun, but it's also distracting. For me personally, right, I didn't really use this function in the first place because I do find it to be a bit overwhelming. But it started to slowly grow on me, especially when I was watching some of my favorite shows in China. And then I started to turn it on, and then when I see certain comments or sentiments I share, I just find, you have that sort of connection over there. So it's quite cool. And that's probably also why the users in China, they started to develop a certain pattern. They will watch the video first time without Damokun, and the second time they will turn it on just for the entertainment of it. And moving on, we can look at the news. Again, I think this one we can tell whether it has any difference just by looking at it. And for internet banking and payment, I have picked Alipay and Venmo because both of them are like having a social element. So for Alipay, you can see that you have a list of contacts, and let's say you pick a contact, you will be able to key in your transaction amount, and then you can authenticate using face recognition, and then it's done. For Venmo, I wasn't able to download this app, so I've taken a promo clip from their site. So it may not cover the full elements, but you can also see that it very much uses a messaging concept. So for both Alipay and Venmo, I think the main transaction experience still runs largely in parallel because both of them adopt a messaging sort of concept. And although Alipay has a few more peripheral elements, the transactions are still quite clean and straightforward. And finally, for e-commerce, so Taobao and Amazon, I think all of us are very familiar with the names already. So again, Taobao seems to be able to pack in a lot more information. That's probably about 20 over links on the main page. Yeah, so what have we observed based on all these case studies? I think it goes without saying that the information density differs drastically between Chinese and Western apps. And it's mostly pronounced in the portal apps where the main purpose is just to aggregate information. So when you are looking at a news site or when you are browsing for video, the portal apps has a lot more to present to you on the Chinese side. But when the user is focused on a singular task, like I'm just trying to message my friend or I just want to transfer money, then you start to realize the interface start to have a higher level of parallel. And now I think we're going to get to the most interesting part of the talk, like why? So I'm not sure if any of you guys shared about your guesses on this before. So I have come up with 3 hypotheses based on my research. And the first one is technology leapfrog has allowed for super apps. For many Westerners, their first encounter with the internet is through the computer, whereas for a lot of Chinese, especially those who grow up in the rural area, their first encounter is through mobile. So in the US, the mobile is the dessert, but in China, it's the main course. for many Chinese, the internet is mobile. If you look at the statistic over here, 98% of Chinese netizens use mobile to access the internet. Of course, if you just look at this number, it could be a bit misleading because many of them are multi-platform users. So they would use laptop and possibly tablet and mobile all at the same time. But still a significant portion of Chinese use mobile as the primary access to the internet. Also, I found another piece of data that says about 40% of Chinese users were mobile only in 2011. And after that, the numbers start to decrease because people could afford like laptop and other computers already, but their initial kind of contact point was still mobile. So as you would imagine, then it makes sense for the mobile app to provide entry to the full array of services, both because of educational and practical reasons. Whereas in the West, when you think about the background, the backdrop, they started using internet through desktop, and they are very used to, like, I go to Google for search, and then I'll go to Facebook for staying in contact with my friends. So when on desktop, they're going to discrete sites for very different purpose. When I started using mobile, this kind of mindset naturally transferred to it. So they're very used to separate apps for separate purposes. And also in the very early days, technology were still having lots of constraints. So the early mobile apps also were quite bare bones in terms of features. As the digital space evolved, then they slowly transitioned to a mobile first mindset, which focus on just placing the essential features on the mobile. So maybe that's another reason why Western apps tend to look more simplistic and streamlined. So I was wondering about this, like if we say technology leapfrog is one of the reasons why Chinese apps were more complex, then wouldn't other population, which is also experiencing technology leapfrog, seeing similar patterns? And we're right in the example of it, right? Because we're in Southeast Asia and it's a lot of emerging markets. So it seems that super apps are also having some commercial success over here. I've taken a look at like Tokopedia. So this one is an Indonesian app. It's an e-commerce app at its core, but it also provides top-up services, digital wallet, travel deals, and you're even able to purchase financial products on this platform. So as you would imagine, it's kind of out of necessity as well, because the Indonesian market, their credit card penetration rate is about 10%. So when people are trying to buy stuff online, it makes sense to have a digital wallet because that's the easiest way to make a transaction. So the super apps, they have seen the gaps in the market and they have risen up to provide the services. For Grab, similarly, it started in Singapore and then it grew from just a ride-hailing app into a very versatile market player that offers food delivery, trip planning, even hotel booking services. So as we see super app, this model has proven to be quite valid in some cases. Would the West also start to incorporate some of this into their app design, since now the digital landscape has also changed a lot? In other words, will we see a similar trend in the West? So the case in point I've given here is for Facebook, because famously for Facebook in 2014, they have split out the Facebook Messenger from the main app. So instead of kind of converging into a super app, it's trying to split out the apps, which is quite interesting. And I quote Mark Zuckerberg, he says that on mobile, each app can only focus on doing one thing well, we think. So maybe that is the kind of rationale behind and that also explains like the ethos of the UX design is very different from the East, like in China. That being said, I also read an interesting news article recently talking about Facebook trying to merge Messenger and WhatsApp and Instagram possibly. So it was not to merge the UI completely, but more to allow someone using Instagram being able to communicate with someone only having a WhatsApp account. I find it to be quite cool because obviously Facebook also start to see there's a benefit in consolidation. So in the future, whether you would really start to incorporate more features, that's a different problem. But this space is still very interesting to watch as users' needs and what they value may continue to evolve. For the second hypothesis, I'm just going to show you a few pictures and you can guess like where I'm trying to go with this. So this is a typical Chinese city. Lots of buildings, lots of shops, lots of people. And this one is, I've taken a US city as an example. I mean, this is a suburban area. So according to a housing survey in 2017, majority of Americans live in suburbs. So that's 52% of the population, followed by 27% living in the urban areas, and then 21% in rural areas. So if you are middle class American, this is probably the environment you're gonna grow up in. And when you look at the city environment, of course, it has a lot more elements and it's more bustling with activities. But I would say that the sensory load probably is not as high as those in China. So you probably already guessed that the hypothesis I'm trying to formulate here is that the digital design is partly an extension of the physical environment design. So there's a level of parallel. It's quite natural to expect, like if you grow up in an environment like this with buildings more spaced out, with lots of, with ample space between people, right? You'll start to impart some of these qualities into your design as well. Maybe not just digital design. So I found another example, which could also be used to illustrate this point. So that's like the Chinese New Year decoration, where it's a combination of all the Chinese elements. So as a designer, the first thing I've noticed is how the color palette is very similar from the offline to the online environment, because it's using the red color, then you have the yellow color. And then even in terms of the iconography, the typography, and even spacing, you can kind of say that it has a level of consistency over there. So yeah, there's a parallel between physical and digital space. And in China and some of the Asian countries, people who live in densely populated cities, they're more used to the high level of sensory load in the urban environment. And it's associated with a sense of convenience and abundance, well, maybe a sense of overclutter as well. So on which spectrum would you perceive it? Probably depends on where you come from. So again, that kind of provides another perspective to look at why the Chinese apps tend to be more complex, and then the Western apps have more white space to balance it and generally look more minimalistic. And the final hypothesis actually has something to do with the language itself. So I would argue that your interface is as complex as your language. When you look at the Chinese character and the English word over here, some of the difference become very obvious. So in terms of the layout, the Chinese characters are two-dimensional, whereas the English characters are linear. And for the number of strokes, each English character has about 1 to 3 strokes, whereas the Chinese character tend to have a lot more. So this particular one over here, it has 7 strokes. And the most complex character in Chinese is said to have 57 strokes. Then in terms of the character set, we have over 50,000 Chinese characters in comparison to 26 English characters. So I know that for typeface design, so if you're trying to design like a new English typeface, you probably can sit down and relax after you have worked on this 26 characters, right? And you can just appreciate the beautiful work you have done. But imagine if you are designing for like a new Chinese typeface, the amount of work involved is orders of magnitude of difference. So when I think of that, all I have is deep respect to people who have come up with new Chinese typeface. But anyway, coming back to the topic itself, so the Chinese language is widely recognized as one of the most difficult language in the world, and with good reasons, right? So I have found a theory. I need to attribute it to Quora post. So it basically says that in cultures that use more complex alphabets, people's brains are highly trained to pass large amounts of data, and therefore they're more accustomed to finding information and digesting it quickly. So when I look at it and I thought, it sounds like it's quite sensible. And so if we infer from here, then other cultures which also use complex alphabets will likely have a more complex interface as well. And the country that immediately came to mind was Japan, because they also, they've woven some Chinese characters into their language too. When I look at Yahoo, their most popular site, I think you will probably not characterize this as a simple website design because it's actually quite compact. So it does provide a lot more information than the counterpart of like, say, Google sites or other news sites in the West. So maybe the theory does have teeth. And what have we learned by looking through all these different apps and then thinking about the reasons? Well, I have kind of come up with 2 key takeaways. The first one is that no matter what you're designing, remember the greater context. Because when we design, we don't really design devoid of a context. So sometimes the context has more to do with the cultural background, sometimes more to do with the state of mind of the user, sometimes more with the physical environment. But no matter what you're designing, you ignore the context at your own peril. We've already seen how the cultural backgrounds has shaped the design for Chinese and Western apps. So let me give you another example of how Grab designed the apps. So the app is always used by like riders and drivers on the road under the sun. So in order to make sure their interface still, the contrast level still holds in those situations, the designers will dim their screen and then they will stand next to a window under bright sunlight to check whether the key interface elements still has a good legibility. So always be aware of the context you are designing for. And the second takeaway is that people are creatures of habits. So know when these habits will help them adopt your designs faster and when these habits will present potential challenges. If you show a Chinese app to a Westerner, he or she may look at it and say it's too cluttered to be useful. Whereas if you show a Western app to a Chinese, and then he or she may feel that it's very skeletal with little functionality. So those kind of reactions come off ingrained in their habits. That's why if we know the habits and the mindset of our users well, we'll be able to leverage to our advantage. So a typical example is we all see tabs, right? So tabs originally started as a physical object in our day-to-day life, and people use it to organize office files and basically keeping things neat. So this has seamlessly translated into a digital design component. And even if someone is looking at it for the first time, they will be able to kind of like pick it up immediately because they're already familiar with this in their daily work and they are kind of habitual to how it works. But when you try to work against people's habit, it will introduce a lot of challenges and people may not embrace your design very well. So I'll give you an example on a government project I'm working on. So when we try to redesign the interface, we have come up with a new one, which is nothing like the old interface. So it's completely new, but when we present it to the users, they're able to pick it up very quickly, like not so many questions, like they will be able to understand it as well. Reason being, we haven't really changed the underlying business flow. So if they're used to doing their work in a particular way, they're still able to follow the same logic. That part hasn't changed. But imagine if we try to change the entire look and feel of the interface, and we also try to change their way of working completely, then that will probably give us a lot more obstacle along the way. So before closing this off, I would like to talk about another bonus point, because as consultants, we seldom take in information without some level of questioning or a little bit more deep digging. So I've presented you 3 different hypotheses in this talk, and I would encourage you to like approach it with a critical mindset, always to think about how do we test and validate the hypothesis further? And that's a very important part in building tested and valid user products. So the next time, whatever project you're working on, remember to keep on the critical thinking mindset, and that would enable us to build good digital products with positive impact. Okay, so I think it's time for answering questions, if you have any.